My mom's worked in offices for over 13 years, so stories like this hit close to home. This isn't some clickbait, it's based on real emotions, real patterns people face every day. If you've ever been overlooked, replaced, or quietly pushed aside, this story is for you. Names, companies, and places are changed, but the lesson, 100% real. Let's talk about what we let happen and how to stop it.
The moment I knew everything was about to collapse, I was on my back underneath rack 14, tightening a mount that had started to hum at high load. The hum meant stress. The stress meant heat. And heat meant risk. My entire body was half covered in fiberglass dust, one knee bruised from the concrete. I heard their footsteps before I saw them, Harold's heavy shuffle followed by the light, smug rhythm of his son's polished loafers. Brandon's voice rang out, too loud for a place like this. "So, this is the dungeon," he said, laughing. "Kinda dark and medieval. You ever think of, turning this into cloud?" Cloud. He said it like it was a cleaning product. I didn't respond. Just finished my torque check and slid out, standing up slowly. My shirt was damp. My eyes locked with Harold's for half a second. He looked away first. If you're enjoying stories like this one, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give the video a like. It really helps the team bring you more of these quiet war stories. Only 3% of listeners subscribe, and everyone makes a real difference. The farm was humming, stable, cool. We just passed our quarterly power integrity audit with a 99.87% uptime score. Every router was clean, every failover tested. 14 years of my life had been poured into this place, and not just professionally, I bled into these floors. Late nights when the generator failed and I rigged it back with parts from my own pickup. Weekends when no one answered the emergency line except me. Every time someone forgot how fragile a system really was. I was the quiet reset button. Harold used to understand that. Back in the early years, he'd stop by my workbench with his own coffee. Not some Starbucks nonsense. He brought burnt diner sludge in a thermos and sat with me, asking about throughput and server redundancy like he genuinely wanted to learn. We'd built Southridge together, not with capital, but with caution. We lost our first stack in 2011, server fire. I was the one who crawled through smoke to pull the blade backups. He called me his fireproof engineer for years after that. But lately, all I heard was Brandon. Brandon, who pronounced SSL as SSL like it was a sorority. Brandon, who mocked my labeling system as extra. Brandon, who once unplugged a server mid-sync because he thought the blinking light meant it was broken. I documented it, of course. Quietly. Always quietly. The writing was on the wall long before they admitted it. Harold started sitting in on fewer system reviews. My patch requests got delayed. The infrastructure budget shrank while branding and client experience ballooned. Then came the tour. A full dog and pony show for potential investors. I wasn't invited, but I watched the security footage after hours. Watched Harold lead them through, watched Brandon talk like he'd personally built the firewall I'd architected during a 3-day no-sleep stint in 2018. He called the server room my future playground. I wrote that phrase down, dated it, filed it. Still, I stayed silent. Because some systems only crash when you hit the wrong key at the wrong time, and I wasn't ready yet. Not until Harold approached me outside the main server bay on a Tuesday morning. "Got a minute?" he said, casual, like he was asking about lunch, not legacy. The lights above flickered slightly, an issue with the ballast I hadn't gotten around to yet. He looked up, frowning, then back at me. "We're shifting things around," he started. Brandon stepping up. "Time for the next generation." I blinked once, didn't speak, just waited. He filled the silence with the words that would come to define everything that followed. "You'll move into compliance reporting, a lighter load, less pressure, let Brandon take on the architecture stuff. You've done your part." I almost laughed, but I didn't. I just nodded and said, "Sure." Then I walked back to my console, opened the root audit terminal, and started a full export of my configurations. If they wanted me boxed up, I'd come with a receipt. He said it like he was offering me a slice of cake. Time to hand things off. Just like that. Like the 14 years I'd spent turning Southridge's infrastructure from a glorified server closet into a zero downtime fortress was just a warm-up act. Brandon stepping up. he added, the words sliding out of his mouth like a sales pitch he didn't believe. You'll move into compliance reporting. Lighter load, paperwork. I was holding a fiber test report in one hand, half turned toward the cold aisle. I didn't even blink. You're benching me, I said, not asking, just stating. Harold gave that awkward chuckle older men do when they know they're gutting you but want to pretend they're doing you a favor. Come on, it's just the natural next phase. You've done your part. Brandon's got the vision now. You've got the experience to help him succeed. Vision. The boy couldn't even tell the difference between a checksum and a coffee order. He once called a blade server a boxy laptop. I'd watched him break a cabinet latch trying to yank it open without disengaging the security tabs. He left his guest credentials stuck to the firewall cabinet on a neon sticky note. I kept my voice level. And Brandon understands the control architecture? Harold waved a dismissive hand, already turning away. He's a fast learner. Besides, you'll train him. That's when it clicked. This wasn't a transition, it was a muzzle. Strip away my access, shift me to paperwork, and by the time Brandon lit something on fire, they'd say I was the one who trained him. That, I signed off. That, I stayed. But I wasn't staying. That night, I sat at home with a glass of bourbon and a laptop full of my own notes, metadata, dependencies, escalation protocols, route configurations. Not the sanitized documentation I'd handed to onboarding teams over the years. The real guts. The kind of knowledge that only lives in the margins of old engineers' minds. I opened a blank memo titled Departure Protocol. It wasn't dramatic, no threats, no emotion, just line after line of exact instructions on what to disable, who to notify, where the silent tripwires were, every badge ID, every IP reservation, every redundant circuit I'd built with my own two hands, and I labeled the file with the date, just in case someone ever questioned who knew what, when. I thought back to the first week after the 2011 fire, when I'd worked 72 hours straight to stabilize the cores, when Harold brought me a tuna sandwich at 3 a.m. and said, "This place runs because of you." Now I was being replaced by a kid who once asked me if RAID was like retro hard drive stacking. At 2:17 a.m., I zipped the file, encrypted it, and dropped it into a mirrored drive I knew Brandon would never find. I also made a printed copy. Not because I needed it, but because the feel of paper in your hands reminds you that some things still exist outside of cloud pitches and startup buzzwords. I wasn't angry. I was clear, and clarity is colder than rage. When I returned to work the next morning, I smiled at Brandon's empty desk. It still had plastic wrap on the monitor. He'd be arriving any day now, full of theories and PowerPoints. He'd be expecting a mentor. Instead, he'd find a locked terminal, a clean audit trail, and a woman who no longer answered to anyone in that building. I'd already decided. I would train no one. I would sign nothing. I would burn no bridges, but I'd leave enough silence behind that they'd hear it echo for years. Brandon waltzed in like he was arriving for a podcast interview, not stepping into the command center of a regional data infrastructure worth more than the building it sat in. Starbucks in one hand, phone in the other, shoes too clean for anyone who's ever had to trace a bad ground connection. "You ready to show me the ropes?" he said with a grin like we were equals. Or worse, like he thought he was my upgrade. I didn't answer right away. I was unplugging my terminal, keyboard, monitor, encrypted drives, the backup fob I kept hidden behind the rack. Everything precise. Everything final. I'd already wiped my credentials, rotated root, and revoked back-end access by the time he crossed the room. Not maliciously, cleanly, legally, documented. "No," I said, standing up and pushing my chair in. "I'm done here." He paused mid-sip, confused. "You're... what?" I reached into my satchel and pulled out the manila folder. Heavy. Intentional. Printed in triplicate, because I don't trust digital handoffs when the people on the receiving end can't spell checksum. I laid it gently on his desk like I was setting down an urn. That's the full systems inventory, offboarding instructions, contacts for each vendor, logs, expiry dates, redundancies. Anything you don't understand in there, you probably shouldn't touch. He blinked at it like it was radioactive. "Wait, what even is this?" Behind him, Harold's voice echoed as he stepped in. "What's going on?" He saw the powered-down terminal, the neatly packed box, the empty chair. "Wait, hold on," he said, stepping forward. "This isn't how we do things." We had a plan. I turned to face him. That same man who once told me I was the backbone of this company, who once asked me to rebuild a system from ashes with no budget and less sleep, and who now handed the keys to a kid who hadn't spent one weekend fighting packet loss in a storm. I looked him straight in the eye. You made your choice. He opened his mouth like he wanted to object, maybe to bargain, maybe just to explain. But the words didn't come, because there wasn't a single technical thing he could say to keep me there, and both of us knew it. I walked past them without a word, past the racks I'd once rebuilt screw by screw, past the cold aisle where I'd patched lines during a lightning strike, past the cabinet where I'd hidden a candy stash for the interns who never lasted long. At the door, I paused for one last glance, not out of sentiment, but clarity. I wanted to remember the exact moment they realized what they'd done. Brandon was flipping through the folder, eyebrows furrowed, lips moving silently as he tried to decode the difference between VLAN and VPN. Harold just stood there, stunned, watching the ghost of everything he'd just lost walk out with perfect posture. They didn't yell. They didn't ask me to stay. They didn't know how. In the lobby, I handed in my badge to Marcy at reception. She looked confused. Is this a system upgrade thing? I smiled. Something like that. I stepped out into the Texas sun, heat rising off the pavement like a fever breaking. My phone buzzed once. An email confirming the off-boarding ticket I'd scheduled had auto-closed successfully. All credentials void. Clean handoff. End of file. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just walked away, with 14 years of knowledge they could no longer afford to pretend was replaceable. The first call came at 11:42 a.m., a number I recognized as Southridge Legal. I watched it ring out as I stirred cream into my coffee at a quiet corner diner 2 exits down from the office. I didn't decline the call. I let it ring. I wanted a timestamp, a record. Their panic had begun. By noon, they'd tried twice more. Voicemail from some associate junior counsel, breathless. We'd just like to clarify some language in your contract regarding post-termination. Clarify. That was their first misstep. Clause 7.4b didn't require clarification. It required a calculator and a chair with armrests, because the number it triggered wasn't small. Back in 2011, after I personally recovered the post-fire raid clusters and rebuilt the core spine on a weekend of fumes and sheer will, Harold sat across from me in a temporary trailer we called HQ and said, "You've earned permanence here." We redrafted my contract. Quietly. No HR, just legal and a private signer. Clause 7.4b wasn't showy. One line, one condition, one outcome. It read, voluntary termination following role reclassification without technical equivalent assignment activates the equity dissolution trigger with full acceleration of deferred compensation. That sentence sat on page 17 of a contract no one had bothered to audit in over a decade, until now. At the time, the value of that clause was mostly symbolic, a token, a nod. But over 14 years, with equity grants rolling in and deferred comp stacking, it had matured into something far heavier. $6.1 million spread across accelerated stock dissolution, milestone bonuses, and a contractual clause that made performance-based severance due within 30 days of execution. Not negotiable, not discretionary, just active. At 1:06 p.m., Brandon sent out a company-wide Slack post that tried very hard to sound relaxed, excited to take the reins and keep things moving, grateful for everything our legacy team has built. Legacy, a word people like him use when they don't know how systems work, only that they cost money. I heard from someone in network ops, off the record, that Brandon also asked if they could pause the clause, as if legal contracts worked like Netflix subscriptions. By 3:15, a message from Harold himself landed in my inbox. Subject line, "Can we discuss your exit terms?" I didn't open it. Instead, I opened the Dropbox archive where I'd stored every document, every amendment, every revision, and forwarded a copy of the signed 2011 recontract to my lawyer, along with a short note. Clause 7.4b is in play. Please prepare formal demand for execution. She replied 6 minutes later. Already drafting. Their counsel is rattled. No surprise there. Clause 7.4b wasn't buried in legal jargon. It was painfully clear. It didn't require termination to be unfair, only mismatched. And moving me from systems architecture to compliance reporting, that wasn't equivalent. It was a demotion wrapped in HR spin. At 4:40 p.m., I got a text from someone in finance. Just 2 words. They're stunned. Because the moment they tally the line items, stock, bonuses, legal fees, audit provisions, they realized something devastating. Replacing me wasn't just arrogant. It was expensive. Harold apparently called it a misunderstanding. Brandon called it ridiculous. But the in-house counsel, she just called it binding. And finance? They went silent. Funny thing about silence, it sounds an awful lot like respect when it finally shows up too late. They thought it was just about the money. A $6.1 million mistake they could maybe soften, renegotiate, delay. Brandon fired off a series of frantic emails to HR with subject lines like urgent, clause 7.4b alternatives, and possible equivalency reclassification. 3 question marks, always a good sign from someone in over his head. HR tried to help him, bless their hearts. But clause 7.4b didn't care about titles or tempers. It didn't care that he was the founder's son. It was a machine-written promise, legally binding, executed the moment I walked out the door without an equivalent technical role defined and agreed upon. No committee override, no vesting delays, no post-exit modifications. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem started 24 hours later when vendor management opened my off-boarding memo and saw 3 words they hadn't seen before. Key personnel trigger. Because back in 2016, when Southridge was growing fast and sloppy, I'd worked with legal to lock in our service level agreements with 3 major telecom clients. It was a move to stabilize operations after an executive nearly tanked our server uptime with a budget freeze. Those SLAs weren't just standard boilerplate, they had riders. Riders that said certain personnel, me specifically, had to remain active and named in operations reviews, or the contract would default to a 90-day renegotiation window. No me, no guarantee. No me, no trust. No me, no service. I warned Harold when we drafted them. If you want me to be invisible, don't make me irreplaceable. He laughed. Signed the papers anyway. Now Brandon was stuck. Client number 1, Regional Telecom of West Texas, multi-million contract. Sent a notice, please confirm that Ms. Merritt will continue to oversee infrastructure compliance. If not, we are invoking SLA Clause 4.2 for reassessment. Client number 2, Arcline Communications. Bigger fish. They didn't even blink, just wrote, if she's gone, our SLA is void. No debate. Client number 3 didn't write, they called, and not to Southridge, to Stratacore, where I'd already accepted a new position. But we'll get to that later. Brandon, desperate, forwarded the email from Arcline to legal. Subject, can we fix this? Legal's reply was short, brutal, honest, not without her. Inside Southridge, the scramble started. Finance tried to model delay strategies, holding my payout until Q4, calling it reclassification review. Legal shut that down in minutes. The clause was airtight, auditable, time-stamped. I'd even included the contract hash in my exit memo. They ran the checksum. It matched. Procurement tried to reroute vendor dependencies. Half of them came back unsigned. My sign-off was still required for the endpoint compliance. And HR tried to draft a counteroffer, a strategic advisor role. Brandon's idea, a way to bring me back quietly under a different title, without admitting failure. They even promised I could work from home and avoid brand disruption. They didn't understand. I didn't walk away for peace and quiet. I walked away because they thought I'd teach the man who took my place. Now they were teaching themselves what happens when the person you discarded turns out to be the only person who knew where the fuse box was. And the fire was just starting. The demand letter went out at 8:03 a.m. sharp. My lawyer, Michelle Klein, corporate litigation with a talent for precision, attached the clause text, the contract, the schedule of deferred equity, and a summary of accrued penalties if payment wasn't received within 10 business days. The language was cold, exact, unmistakable. At the bottom, one final line. Failure to comply within stated period will escalate to binding arbitration with a minimum enforcement penalty of 3 times the outlined amount per clause 7.4b, VI. It wasn't a threat. It was a countdown. Day 1, silence. Day 2, 10:12 a.m. One of Southridge's long-term telecom clients, Keystone West, paused their pending system renewal. No reason given. Just a subject line. Awaiting confirmation of technical continuity. That was a phrase I'd written myself years earlier into their procurement template, and now it was turning back on them like a tripwire they'd forgotten existed. Day 3, just after noon, I got a message from Daniel Huang, our contracted cybersecurity consultant. Well, their consultant now. He was copied on my exit memo and was sharp enough to read between the lines. Brandon asked me to review your old config notes, he said in a text. I declined. Conflicts of interest. Also, I'm out. Not my kind of chaos. That same afternoon, a VP from Ops tried to schedule a friendly coffee via LinkedIn. I didn't respond. Michelle advised me not to. Let the clock tick. Let the pressure rise. Let the silence stretch. Day 4, 8:17 p.m. Brandon showed up at my apartment. He stood there at the security call box, holding his phone like it would grant him authority. I watched through the corner of my blinds as he leaned in, pressed the buzzer twice, and waited. My phone lit up. Unknown caller. Houston TX. I didn't answer. He buzzed again. Then again. The last time he did, he said something to the intercom mic I couldn't quite make out, but his voice cracked. I didn't move. He stood there for 5 minutes, then left. I watched him walk to his car. Same smug posture as always, but slower now, less sure of the ground beneath his feet. Day 5, Harold. The call came in at 6:41 p.m., blocked number. The voicemail was 37 seconds long. I listened once, then again, then saved it to my legal archive. His voice was strained. Less of the old Southern charm, more of the clipped, careful cadence of a man trying to convince himself this wasn't collapsing around him. I just want to talk. We didn't mean for things to go this way. We thought you were just tired. We thought maybe the shift would be good for you. I didn't realize, look, we're trying to make things right. If there's something reasonable we can agree on, let's talk, okay? Click. There was no apology, no ownership, just rationalization. The kind people use when they've miscalculated badly and are still hoping they can buy their way out without admitting they ever needed you. Michelle's next letter didn't mention the voicemail, but it didn't need to. It simply reiterated the deadline, 5 p.m., 10 business days from receipt. No flexibility, no grace period, just the clause. Each day that passed, the pressure built, internally at Southridge, externally from clients, quietly from within the very systems I'd helped engineer to be robust, but only as robust as the person holding the keys. And that wasn't Brandon. Not anymore. Not ever. Stratacor's office smelled like fresh paint and smart decisions. Not a ping-pong table in sight. Just engineers who still carried screwdrivers and whiteboards filled with architecture, not branding slogans. The day I walked in, they handed me a badge that read, A. Merritt, Director of Infrastructure Strategy. No pomp, no onboarding circus. Just a handshake, a login, and the keys to systems they wanted me to design from the ground up. Smaller company. Leaner, sharper, no legacy weight dragging innovation down, and more importantly, leadership that asked questions before making assumptions. On my second day, the CEO walked past my workstation and casually asked, "Is there a naming scheme you prefer for the new server nodes? Want your initials in the root?" I nearly laughed, not because I needed vanity, but because someone finally understood what it meant to be deliberate. In Houston, meanwhile, Southridge was unraveling one polite crisis at a time. On day 6, Harold sent a note through a personal email, the kind you use when you don't want legal to know you're reaching out. It was short and full of that old false humility. Hope you're well. We're hoping you'll consider a short-term consulting contract, just a few weeks, to stabilize infrastructure while we onboard new leadership. Stabilize. As if I'd been the unstable one. I didn't reply. Michelle did. 2 lines, clinical, bulletproof. All future communication through counsel. Compensation terms outlined remain unchanged. Translation. The price of pretending I was disposable is the cost of realizing I wasn't. They'd done the math by then. Deferred equity, accelerated severance, client penalties, arbitration risk. Michelle had added a clause to the last letter reminding them of the SLA liabilities still unfolding in parallel. By the end of that quarter, Southridge issued an internal memo: temporary freeze on executive bonus disbursements pending strategic payout obligations. A polite way of saying, we had to gut the top floor's perks to cover what we owed the woman we shoved out the door. I heard through the grapevine that Brandon started working from home more. Fewer office appearances, rumors he was exploring other ventures. One night, I got a message from Marcy, the front desk admin back at Southridge. Just a thumbs up emoji and a screenshot of the badge log system. The message said, "Still says your old credentials ping the system once a day. Guess they never fully cleared you." I smiled. I'd already revoked my access, but the echo remained, residual code in their system that still thought I belonged, like muscle memory that hadn't caught up to the trauma. At Stratacore, my team asked if I wanted to present the new system's overview to leadership. I said sure, kept it simple, just the diagrams, the strategy, the failovers, the recovery tiers. No drama, no need to prove anything. I didn't have to raise my voice to reclaim control. All I had to do was leave the wrong room and build a better one. 3 weeks after I started at Stratacore, I got a message from an old contact at Keystone West, the same telecom partner Southridge once begged me to stabilize after a botched firmware rollout. The subject line read, "Thought you'd enjoy this." Inside was a screenshot of an internal Southridge service ticket. Red font, flagged priority. Former directors' root-level credentials still active, urgent revocation needed. Beneath that, a timestamp. And the final line, "System lockout complete, network stable." I stared at it for a long second and smiled. They'd finally realized I hadn't just worked their infrastructure. I was their infrastructure. The systems were mine in muscle memory, in command line syntax, in invisible redundancies only I ever checked on Sundays while everyone else was at brunch. And now, they were frantically tracing breadcrumbs they never understood were there. What that ticket didn't say, but I knew, was this: those credentials had been ghosted, rerouted, layered beneath access tiers Brandon never asked about. Not because I was malicious, because I built with caution, because I planned for failure, because root level doesn't mean access, it means understanding, and Brandon had neither. Harold must have finally caved and brought in an outside firm to clean up what they assumed would be a simple sweep. "Remove her access," he probably said, thinking it was as easy as checking a box. What they found instead was a layered labyrinth of permissions, automation scripts, legacy keys, escalation lockouts, and time-based overrides, some of which had been buried under 6 years of audit logs and still triggered fail-safes if removed incorrectly. They didn't tell me that, of course, but I didn't need them to. I saw it in the ticket language, in the delay, in the sheer panic of the phrase, "urgent revocation," and still, they missed a few. That same week, Stratacore signed 2 of Southridge's mid-tier partners. No cold calls, no roadshows, no 20-slide pitch decks, just quiet referrals. A VP from one client told us over coffee, "Your new director of infrastructure? She built the systems that made Southridge reliable. Before they decided branding was more important than continuity." He didn't say Brandon's name. He didn't have to. Word travels fast in tech. Not the headlines. Those are for IPOs and leadership transitions and fluff pieces on vision. The real word spreads over vendor dinners, sysadmin meetups, and Friday afternoon Slack threads where someone says, "Hey, do you know someone solid for infrastructure?" And someone else replies, "Yeah, she's at Stratacore now." I didn't gloat. I didn't post a LinkedIn announcement. I didn't clap back or drop subtweets. But that week, during our Friday stand-up, Stratacore's CEO paused before closing the call and said, "By the way, great work securing those new accounts. We've never onboarded that fast before." I nodded. Just one line. "Good infrastructure makes everything easier." They all agreed. Back in Houston, I imagine Brandon was still fighting for control of systems he never earned, trying to rewrite configurations he barely understood, putting out fires that lit themselves the moment I stepped out the door. But I didn't watch. I didn't need to. I had nothing left in those servers but ghosts, and they were loyal to me. It ended the way these things always do, not with a press release or a grand apology, but with paperwork. Unremarkable, bureaucratic, permanent. The Department of Labor posted a quiet update. Equity severance disbursement. Case closed. No headlines, no drama, just one more line in the public filings, time-stamped and certified, showing that Southridge had paid exactly what they owed me, down to the decimal. Every dollar of deferred compensation, every accelerated stock unit, every inch of the path they thought they could shortcut. I didn't celebrate, I just screenshotted it and filed it into a folder called Completed Systems. Southridge's website had been scrubbed clean by then. No trace of me, of course. Brandon now held the title Acting Director of Operations, though the word acting did a lot of heavy lifting. Right beneath his name, in light gray font, was a footnote. Supported by external consultants during transition. Translation? We don't trust him to run this alone. Someone forwarded me a screenshot of a recent vendor portal update. Apparently, 3 of the legacy partners I'd managed were still requesting contract reviews, pending architectural continuity. Meaning, they didn't believe he could keep things standing. They weren't wrong. Meanwhile, at Stratacore, my name was on one thing only, my door. Mate plaque, no polish, just lead systems architect, A merit, no title inflation, no job fluff, just the facts. I never posted a farewell thread, never uploaded a lessons learned selfie from my old cubicle. I didn't need to. There's a kind of satisfaction that doesn't broadcast. It settles in your bones like balance returning after a storm. In the months that followed, I built out our new NOC in Dallas, oversaw 2 migrations, spec'd a backup system that got adopted by 3 regional partners without a single edit. No chaos, no drama, just clean transitions, tested protocols, and a team that understood the difference between visibility and vision. Sometimes, on late nights when the hum of the servers blends with the HVIC like a heartbeat, I think about those 14 years at Southridge, the battles no one saw, the wins that came with no applause, the architecture I left behind. And every time I drive through Houston, I glance at the blinking lights atop the Southridge Tower and smile, because I know the core of those systems is still mine, cables I laid, configurations I wrote, failovers I designed. And I know something Brandon never will. It doesn't matter whose name is on the website. The fiber doesn't lie, and every time it pulses, every time a signal jumps from node to node across the network I once built from fire and silence, it carries one truth with it. Quiet, enduring, unmistakable. She built this.